they know they kind of bucked the conventional wisdom on Foster. Their doctors said things different from what the rest of the NFL doctors were saying.
And there were rumors throughout this offseason that maybe that shoulder is not 100% or what they're hearing.
He said our our medical staff, took that risk and weren't afraid to say we see this different from the rest of the league.
And it's interesting to note that no one right now for the 49ers enters fall camp on the PUP list, which I don't think
as far as we know now. They were still finishing, physicals and the conditioning test right now. But yeah, that's a big thing. If every single person is free and clear to go, that's great. Although sometimes I wonder whether that's the right thing to do, because if you put them on the active PUP now and they get hurt again, then they can start the season on it. And that way you have them shelved for 6 weeks, and then you can bring them back without burning a IR designation, which I think that's changed too this year. But there's so many different games you can play with the medical aspect of the NFL. I think what's important right now is everybody's healthy and to go. Pads can come on Sunday. Reuben Foster's shoulder, running back's blitz pickup ability, that's going to be on display probably Monday. I would guess that's when they might do a blitz pickup drill, or maybe later in the week. That's the best drill of training camp, is when you guys got one-on-one and just going right into each other.
And seeing where Foster is now, John Lynch got that text yesterday. He goes through, I believe, it's the ultrasound, one of the final ones he's had on his shoulder. Gets that news. I just want to jump back really quick on Solomon Thomas. Did you get any sort of, inkling that they are concerned about this, Dan? Because because of where it is right now?
They said as much. They said, hey, wait, at what point do you start getting concerned that this guy's missing so much time? He wasn't allowed to participate in the OTAs, some of the off-season stuff.
Last time we saw him here was rookie minicamp in May.
So he said, shoot, I'm concerned right now. I mean, obviously he's a smart guy, Stanford guy. But they are, you're watching that clock. You want a guy introduced to the system. You want your number 3 pick in here and ready to go. One of the other things that caught my ear was when Lynch said, I'm disappointed the deal's not done. He said, I'm disappointed in myself. He knows part of this is on him. So clearly there's no animosity. There's just a little frustration that the deal isn't where both sides want it.
It's actually interesting with the situation with Solomon Thomas. Bay Area was kind of the center there for a lot of these rookies who remained unsigned. Geary and Conley over at the Raiders, and now still 49ers waiting on Solomon Thomas's contract to be finalized, hoping that happens before camp really gets underway.
Kyle Shanahan didn't seem too concerned about it. He quelled it down a little bit, saying he knows Solomon wants to be here and the Niners want him here ASAP, and that it's nothing to get concerned about right now. Mind you, it's day one, so I would think the concern really hits by Sunday once they're in pads, because that's when these defensive linemen really ratchet up. In the off-season workouts, there's really not much they can do other than kind of go through these walkthroughs where they're not hitting each other. So.
And one thing that stopped John Lynch kind of in his tracks, he said in the hallway, he saw Carlos Hyde walk into the building and say he looked exceptional. We spoke with Hyde earlier, and he's down in weight. He usually, for most of his career, he's played at 230. Is fluctuated between, I think, the lowest of 224 in the offseason and 228. Why is it so important for him now? I mean, he said he's in the best physical shape of his life. He's showing off his muscles with the, the sweatshirt that he was wearing earlier today. Why is it so important for him to be playing at a lower weight, do you think?
I think this is Cam's favorite quote.
What, with Carlos Hyde?
Yeah.
That he wants to be the #1 rushing running back in the NFL this season. Rushing running back. 228, he says, it's the lightest he's been since high school. And, each of these last few years, he's been the starter and a new coach has come in and they've promised as if Carlos Hyde is going to be the centerpiece of their offense. Well, Kyle Shanahan hasn't had to say that because, the offense is going to run through Brian Hoyer, because Brian Hoyer knows how to run the offense well as the quarterback, having been in the scheme. But they need a running back that's, really going to be a complementary part, not only running the ball, but receiving. And a good question today somebody asked was, does Kyle Shanahan want a bell cow running back, the guy getting most of the carries, or does he want to split carries like he did in Atlanta, where you have mostly a running back and a receiving guy? And Hyde in the past hasn't been that receptive to receiving, no pun intended on the words, but that he's worked on that. And I think Carlos Hyde knows this is a big year for him to prove everybody that he can be a top flight running back in the National Football League. He wants to be the #1 running back at year's end in terms of rushing yards. He only has 3 100-yard games in 3 seasons, which is not a lot for a guy that has such high ambitions. I think it's great that he's coming in with that goal. He needs to stay healthy, obviously, and that's something he has been able to do.
Right. I think being a little lighter, a little leaner, makes sense in the Kyle Shanahan system.
Sure.
I mean, I think past coaches, past systems here have been, let's grind it out, let's bang the ball, let's go straight at them. And Kyle Shanahan gets his guys out in space. They're catching the ball, but they're also running outside the tackles. They're doing more things. I think they split carries. And Hyde saw the draft. He knows they took Joe Williams out of Utah, got a lot of promise, showed a lot of flash. I think Shanahan and Lynch are still in that mode where they're trying to figure out, do they want the bell cow? They're going to take a look, and they're going to adapt their scheme to what they see in these early weeks.
Yeah, 7 running backs currently on the roster entering camp. Carlos Hyde in the last year under his contract. So obviously, Cam, as you said, a big year. The expectations for the 49ers to take one step closer to putting 2-14 from last season behind them. The last few years going into August, it's always talking about the turnover and trying to push that turnover aside and start something new here. I got the sense today, we talked with 5 players, starting out with Brian Hoyer, Joe Staley, Navarro Bowman, Eric Reed, and then Carlos Hyde to wrap things up. The differences in the coaching staffs, it's obviously what the players are going to be asked about every single year. The energy, though, and you talk to a guy like Joe Staley, who has been doing this a decade, and has been in a Shanahan, is familiar with the system and has been around him before. That 100% confidence that he was talking about in ownership from coaches, front office, the whole thing. And he was really impressed with the overall knowledge. And I think,
you're right. It was a different tone.
Defensively.
We've all been through this drill. You've all been through this drill of hearing them sing the praises of the new coach and how it's going to be different. It's a new era and there's a new. But today was oddly specific. Guys, we're talking about Shanahan knows what every player on the field is doing and why, and can break down plays and can explain why it's going to work and explain why they need to adapt to a different defense. And Staley said it, but Hoyer said it. Bowman said it in different ways. They're all talking about the same thing, that this guy, we have faith in his ability to teach and his ability to, to strategize, to adjust, to, call a game.
And they've talked about how Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch preached accountability, and that was something that in the exit interviews last season, everybody said there was no accountability. And I think, it showed in these last few weeks when they were away from the roost, so to speak. They went and worked out on their own, came in good shape. And players are ready to go. And, and Eric Reed brought up a point of how these coaches just seem to get along well. Was it Eric Reed that said it?
I think that he said no egos.
These guys aren't egotistical. There's no talking over each other saying, that's my domain. They very incorporate each other's ideas. And that's good to know now. But again, they haven't lost a game yet together. So we're back to, and one thing about those veterans, like they were all saying, hey, yeah, there's a new energy. There's definitely more stability. And they buy it, and I buy what they're saying. At the same time, you look at some of them going, are they still going to be on this team in about 3 years when the 49ers should be a playoff contender? And it's almost, I can almost like get a taste of there's some bittersweet, and like what they're saying goes, yeah, things are going in the right direction, but I need to be in the right direction now because I only have 1 or 2 more years where I'm at the top of my game before I get phased out.
And so where Kyle Shanahan is at this point in his career, he remains the, obviously head coach here. He's going to have offensive coordinator duties. He brings in Robert Saleh as his defensive coordinator. But one thing I took away was what Joe Staley was saying just about, I think he said, endless answers to everything on defense, which means for him, it's usually for offensive coordinators, if they're watching film about how a defense, breaks down their scheme, they're going to deviate and go somewhere else. And for Kyle Shanahan, on film right now, it's not that way. Do you anticipate that changing to where that might not be the case as we get into this season to where, he said earlier that, are you going to change your scheme to fit your players' needs? Or are you going to find those players that fit that scheme? How does that work?
Yeah, I think it's what Staley said is the guy knows how to operate the puzzle. He'll keep turning the cube until he finds the right answer. And I think that's the way he's won over players is knowing what everybody's supposed to do. And I think that whereas Harbaugh was kind of a great offensive mind, I don't remember him talking. He was smart enough to let Fangio handle the defense and knew what he didn't know.
Sure.
But I do think that Shanahan's overall knowledge is really winning these guys over.
It has from day one, and these guys have all talked about, they've thrown the genius word out. But not only that, they bring out examples that you don't hear players usually. They'll say, we'll be sitting in meetings, and the coach will bring up this play, and he'll put it from the other perspective, the other side of the ball, which we've never heard before. And you go, okay, so he's teaching them, and that's for years, the Niners, when Jed York will be these end-of-the-year press conferences or the start-of-the-year press conferences when he's saying, we're going on a coaching search, we want to find a teacher. And I think they've found a great teacher in Kyle Shanahan, who now has to juggle those teaching duties along with game management. And I think that's the part where people are going, how can you do that and make sure the play's in on time, which he said he prides himself on. Interesting stat that he threw out there, saying that the Falcons are the only team in the NFL that did not have a delay of game call the last 2 seasons. And he had that stat at the ready when somebody asked him about Matt Ryan's critical comments about the Super Bowl recently, saying Matt Ryan was saying he didn't have time to change plays because they came in late, which our colleague Matt Mayoko investigated and debunked that whole theory, saying no, they did have time, and there's audibles built in where, and Kyle was saying, yeah, you can tap your ears and you switch to a second play.
And you know, one of the other things is that Navarro Bowman talked about lining up against Shanahan's offense. Already it's tough to guess. Already it's tough to predict. And I think that even some of the great recent Niners teams, which there haven't been that many, but their offense has been predictable. Their offense has been vanilla. And I think that, you know, Hoyer has been in Shanahan's system, so he's got a little bit of a head start, and maybe they can move a little faster than they would with somebody being introduced to it for the first time. But they've got wrinkles, and I think wrinkles for this franchise is a big step at this point.
And sure, some of that has to be speed too. I mean, they said back in OTAs that's where they were teaching them how to practice, which, you know, you take a look at the veteran group here and the guys who are coming in each year learning how to practice under new coaches, and then you throw rookies into the mix, and obviously some of that plays a role in here. You mentioned Brian Hoyer. This is his 9th training camp, and he's in a different position now where he's going into this as the starter. As you know, he doesn't have that position battle, and it's our first year since what, 2010, that Colin Kaepernick is not in the mix somewhere. And you know, we'll get to kind of what obviously some players talking about him and his situation of where he's at right now. But how does, in this system, because obviously they didn't have the running back core in Cleveland in 2014 when the last time these two were together, Kyle Shanahan and Brian Hoyer, that they're going to be anticipating a lot more of, you know, the Devontae Freeman, the Tevin Coleman, how they utilize running backs. Cam, do you think that's going to be a similar situation here? You obviously have a flux of running backs going into camp. Are we going to see some of that in those preseason games to see that how they work into that type of offense?
I think you're going to read anything into the preseason other than they'll keep things under wraps. They'll just see if some guys can handle a blitz pickup here or there. But I am curious to see how they can incorporate, because let's be honest, I mean, they still don't have a lot of proven offensive talent. There's guys that have come in that say, yeah, he might be good, he might be good. They've loaded up so much this offseason on rectifying that defense, which they needed to do, and using high draft picks for it, because they gave up so many damn points last year and so many rushing yards where it was critical. So the defense is going to keep teams from scoring more, and this offense is probably going to benefit from that. And I think Kyle Shanahan is going to know how to utilize those players and get the most out of their talents, rather than say, look, we have a great playmaker out on the wide receiver, we can just throw the ball to him every time, let it go. He needs to craft a great game plan, and that's what he's known for. And I think that's a great reason why they brought him in.
Fair to say that in terms of, I guess, those battles, when we take a look at, you know, receiver, running back, and we'll get into more of that. I mean, the whole core has been depleted. You mentioned they don't have a lot of offensive. Yeah, they don't have a lot of offensive playmakers. Which group do you think in this system offensively is going to, I guess, come to a head first?
Great question. I would say running back, because Carlos Hyde is, I mean, he's the most proven one, at least in a 49er uniform. Pierre Garcon's going to lead the wide receiver core, I think, without a doubt. Kyle Juszczyk's a guy that by like week 3, everybody's going to go, holy cow, this guy's really good. He's so catching about 7 passes a game, and he's helping run or block and everything they want out of him. And Hyde should do okay too. You just wonder, do they have enough targets in the receiving game to merit the trust on defenses, that the defenses are going to play honest and not load up the box against Hyde, whereas Marquise Goodwin's got the downfield speed. You have a good, like 2 or 3 good guys that can play in the slot at receiver, so that's good. And then the tight end is a position that Kyle Shanahan's used really well in the past, and he has 6 tight ends this camp. 3 holdovers and 3 new guys, and it's anybody's guess who stays and who goes. Obviously, 1 or 2 of the new guys are going to stay because they invested in them. So which of one of those 3 old guys are staying? Vance McDonald, who was on the trade block, or Garrett Selleck? And they've done fine. I think they're capable pros, but I think Shanahan wants to lift everybody's level up.
All right, before we end that, we talked about Brian Hoyer just with, you know, he did have the camp in Dallas, which you talked about, the kind of the off-season accountability program. That was the first year he's done that. It was a throwing camp. So obviously that was a cool thing to see them go through. And there's always that cloud, it seems, we've talked about in the all off-season, Dan, just with the, you know, the Kirk Cousins 2018 free agency talk at that point. And he says that, you know, obviously he can't go into this thinking about that, but it, mentality-wise, to where he was at throughout his career, how do you think this helps him going in where, you know, the number 2 battle, whether you know, whether we see CJ Beathard, you know, really take that next step up, maybe that will be one of the position battles we talk about here shortly. How do you think he's going to handle that? Yeah,
it's interesting. He you know, his whole career he's gone into training camp trying to win a job. And the questions, can you win the job? Can you win the job? Today the question for him is, can you win the job next year? You know, will you still be the guy a year from now?
Right.
So he said, well, of course he's going to say it, you take it one game at a time. But he has a chance to really prove his value. And I think the fact that he's played in Shanahan's system helps. It was interesting today, the way he talked about how Shanahan has evolved since they've parted ways. Because back when they were paired together in Cleveland, they didn't throw to the backs the way they did in Atlanta. He didn't have that. He was watching, he said he was watching the playoff game when the Falcons threw a touchdown pass to Tevin Coleman. And he texted him right away and said, I wish we had that play in Cleveland. So, you know, they've got some new things to figure out together. But, you know, in terms of mentally, I think once you're 9 years in the league, you've seen how ruthlessly cruel it can be. And I really genuinely don't think he's thinking about next year. I think he's thinking about getting up to speed, you know, for training camp day 1.
Sure. Yeah. Shanahan got some good questions earlier about Colin Kaepernick and where, you know, when he opted out of that contract, Cam, that's where Shanahan went in and said, okay, I got to find my scheme guy. I've got to find the guy that's going to fit my offense. And that would have been a lot, asking Kaepernick to come back as a backup at that point. It's July, it's the 27th?
Yeah.
It's 27th. He still doesn't have a job. We're hearing
as of this hour.
As of this hour, he could be with the Ravens very shortly. Yeah. You know, Eric Reed said he spoke with him. Some of the other guys were asked about him. Are you surprised the situation of where, you know, do you anticipate by the time most training camps, by the weekend, that he might have a job?
I figured this was going to be, and I said this for a couple months now, I think he'll be on a team. Once a starting quarterback goes down, that's when the panic button is really going to hit teams, because you're going, oh no, we only have a few weeks until the season starts. Whereas, and if you need to placate your fan base or worry about ownership concerns, you say, look, there's no time for you to deal with the PR fallout of this. We have to have a starting quarterback in here now, or somebody with experience. The Ravens really don't have anybody beyond Joe Flacco that I would trust if I was John Harbaugh.
Receivers.
Yeah, and Colin Kaepernick, like the Harbaugh family obviously knows Kaepernick, and they've supported him, and I think the ownership would support it. I think the community would. He gave $25,000 to a youth program in March as part of his $1 million pledge, so he has that going for him too. But, you know, and John Harbaugh talked about Kaepernick today, and the fact that it was kind of almost like a generic thing saying he's going to play in the NFL this year, and, you know, we've supported him, I've talked to him, but it wasn't those, we really hope we get something done. So there's kind of like, well, wait a minute, why isn't he going so far out on a limb? And I'm thinking, if I'm Kaepernick, and I know a lot of people don't think he has any leverage whatsoever in the NFL because he can't get a job anywhere, but you watch and see if 1 or 2 quarterbacks go down, especially in the first exhibition game, like if there's a fluke injury, like Tony Romo hurt his back last year in the opener, right? And then those teams are going to have to panic and bring in somebody with Colin Kaepernick's experience. A lot of teams won't do it because it just doesn't fit their scheme or it doesn't fit what the ownership likes. I think the Ravens would be a great fit for him. And I like Kyle Shanahan explained it in a very fair way today, saying, look, I looked at it solely from a scheme point of view. And to bring him in, he's a starting caliber kind of guy, and I didn't see him as a starter in this scheme. And that's understandable. And let's be honest, I think both sides just needed a break from each other. Colin opted out. People will say, "Oh, well, he didn't get cut. He would have gotten cut. John Lynch has said that they wouldn't carry him at that salary cap number that he was at, so they were going to part ways. And I still believe he's a NFL caliber quarterback and would be somewhere within the next couple of weeks.
It was interesting. I mean, when Eric Reed was asked about him today and asked about the status, possibility that he could play again, gave him a pretty ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
He said, "We all know he can play."
Well, if nobody, he's the guy that knelt with them in the national anthem protest. So if he doesn't have Eric Reed's support, he's not going to have anybody's in this league.
Everybody in this room knows he can play.
Yeah.
Like, that was a pretty ringing endorsement.
Yeah.
And stuff like that doesn't hurt.
Yeah. So practice starts on Friday. Sunday will be the first time that the 49ers go in pads, and that's it's going to be a huge indication to see going down the line where Reuben Foster's at. Going into, it's talking about some rookies now. Obviously, he's at the top of everybody's, I guess, depth chart of one. Like, let's talk about him first. Navarro Bowman brought up some good points and just talking about, is he going to win that job starting opposite him? And just I thought it was interesting, the angles he said, it's different than college. Kyle Shanahan said during preseason, during rookie minicamp, during OTAs, he was really impressed by the way he stayed focused during all these film sessions, was able to pick up on what some of the other defensive positions were doing, knew what they were doing. And now he goes into this. Now we get to see that where he's at physically. How do you think he will fit into that? Having a guy like Navarro Bowman, who's in the middle of his own, he's trying to do his second comeback now from an Achilles tear.
Yeah, a guy that we haven't talked about, who was like the marquee guy the last couple of years.
Exactly. I mean, how does he, in terms of, obviously there's that mentorship aspect there, but where does Reuben Foster need to be so that he wins that job opposite him?
I think, obviously, he got a good endorsement today from Kyle Shanahan saying that he's done well in meetings and stayed awake. He says a lot of these college guys just have trouble going through the film room and meetings, and Reuben Foster's been he's paid attention and he's learned and he seems on top of it, which is great. And a lot of people we're going to scrutinize him so much in the preseason, especially if he gets in exhibition games. But again, we're not really going to know what he can do at linebacker until they're in regular season. And my guess is Malcolm Smith will be the starting linebacker next to Navarro Bowman to start the season for at least for a few games, and they'll get Foster in on some packages, maybe spell them both. And so in a few weeks into it, I'm going to go back in my 49er beat writer history back in the days when Derek Smith was their middle linebacker.
And Pa Cam.
Right? Yeah. And I'd say, hey, Derek, I go, preseason game's going, you guys are looking good. And he just looked at me and just shook his head and laughed. He says, Cam, you have no idea. He's like, the exhibition speed is nothing compared to the regular season speed of the NFL. And so you can't judge these linebackers, running backs, safeties until everything's really going. They compare the NFL to like car crashes, right? So right now you're having car crashes in like school zones, 25 mile an hour. Don't hit a kid. But then if you go into the regular season, you guys got going 75 miles an hour in their Ferraris, like watch out. So I think I did like what Bowman said is when you're making that adjustment from college to the pros, the angles are so much sharper where you have to get in there because guys can cut so fast one direction or the other. And we got to find out if Navarro Bowman can cut with him because that leg of his that took a beating 2-3 years ago in Seattle, God, it was like, about 3.5 years ago. The knee's no longer an issue. The Achilles was repaired. He says he's moved on from it. And it's good to hear that he's done well because the Niners really need a stabilizing force on that defense because once he disappeared in week 4 last season, the whole defense fell apart.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me when they talked about these guys who are coming back from injury, Foster, Bowman, the way their philosophical approach to keeping guys healthy, backing off on the hitting a little bit, not going crazy on the hitting. And I think it was Lynch who mentioned the Bill Walsh mode that, in practice, it doesn't have to be the old school grind it out, bang around and proving ground, the Mike Singletary philosophy. Shanahan sounded realistic about how they're going to watch out for Foster, watch out for Bowman. Bowman made it sound like the speed was going to be a non-issue, right? I think
he said he's at full speed with his Achilles.
Yeah, because I asked him, we're not talking about your health anymore, so what's going on with your health? And I'm ready to go.
I'm ready to go. And the angles thing was really interesting because he'd watched enough of Foster to notice that kind of thing. And that's key because Bowman is a very willing mentor maybe overly so.
Well, he's got, but he doesn't have to be the mentor. They have D'Amico Ryans on staff now, and D'Amico Ryans has played at a high level in the NFL for so many years. And Johnny Holland, I believe, is the linebackers coach. He's very well respected too. So he's going to get the mentoring. He just needs to get on the field. I went to a university that preaches learn by doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know that university, right?
I think you've mentioned
That's
a few
Cal
times.
Poly San Luis Obispo, learn by doing. So Foster needs to get out on the field and learn.
Bowman is also one of the great, like at his peak, one of the great angles, you know, the rangiest linebacker in the NFL, and he was that way in college. So
yeah,
I don't know who taught him, but he's got to pass that along.
I did.
And yeah,
learn by doing.
Yes.
So in terms of that transition, what we see from the college level, some of these high draft picks and where Reuben Foster could fit into that, which young defender, we had the first round draft picks in Solomon Thomas and in Reuben Foster, but there are also guys from, that are still kind of in that youth spurt, DeForest Buckner, Rashard Robinson. Out of those four guys, who do you think is going to be the biggest jump into this the biggest impact of this 2017 season defense?
I would put all my money on DeForest Buckner.
Okay.
The second I saw that guy on the field last year, I said, this guy is going to be an all-pro. He just has the temperament, he has the body, he has the drive. I really think he's going to be an outstanding football player. Not to say the other guys aren't, because Eric Armstead's going to be put in a role this year where he's going to be more of a pass rusher, and that could be great, where you have the 6'7" athletic guy coming at you with a basketball background who's going to be going after it. I think Rashard Robinson's got a lot of promise at cornerback. He's got the swagger for it. He thinks he's going to be the best one out there, which I think you need to have as a cornerback and to make plays. So, and then Foster. And Solomon Thomas is a guy where, well, he's a number 3 overall pick for a reason. Yeah. But he hasn't been on the field, so we have no idea really what kind of impact he's going to have working on the outside and then going on the inside, probably on passing downs, where he did well at Stanford. He did great in the bowl game against Mitch Trubisky, going in from on the inside and sacking him. So that's what the 49ers are hoping. They need all those guys to pan out, honestly, to have a formidable defense in about 3 years where, the majority of those guys become Pro Bowlers.
So over the next 5 weeks until that September 10th date, opener of the season, everybody wants to talk about position battles and who's going to get cut and who's going to move up and down the depth chart. Obviously, in the 2017 preseason, there's only one cut instead of the 2 that the NFL had last year. So that Sunday, I believe it's the 2nd, the roster goes from 90 to 53. So there's a lot of positions up for grabs, and in terms of the depth chart for the 49ers, Robert Saleh in that 4-3 defense, as was talked about multiple times today, the importance of that safety position and being able to load 8 in the box there. And, Navarro Bowman was talking about how, where he fits into that and how that system works for him. Let's talk about that safety position. And Cam, I'm going to start with you here on this. We talked to Eric Reed. He's playing in that contract year, and there is some uncertainty about where he ends up and, what the next 4 or 5 weeks look like for him. He's a run defender. There's going to be, as we said, that 8-man box. How do you think he fits into this group of safeties? Because there's been so much chess movement. I think
it's a great spot for him because his first few years he was a free safety, and he's going to be moving inside the box more now. He said he has the perfect body size for what that position calls a strong safety in the box. So first of all, he's passionate about his new job, which is great. And he admitted that the contract is going to be weighing on his mind. And so, and John Lynch didn't seem like there's any urgency to get any of these guys in new contracts before they prove themselves these next few weeks. I do like how Eric Reed's going to be cast in that. I think Jimmy Ward is somebody that we're not talking about yet, but he's playing the pivotal role in this whole defense as the free safety in a scheme. This is my favorite word that I've heard this year with the 49ers. It's called the eraser position.
Yeah.
Right? Where he's supposed to erase any bad plays they make. Well, gosh, could you imagine how many bad plays they made last year?
Is he supposed to erase his mindset as a corner too?
No, he's your safety. So he's supposed to erase anything like if Eric Reed messes up, well, then the eraser comes in and cleans it up, right? And Jimmy Ward is a versatile guy who's been wanting to make plays and become an NFL star. The second they draft him as a first rounder, this guy kind of has a lot of energy and life to him. I want to see what he can do. Well, he's going in. He's got one more year under contract after this too, so he's also going to be playing for a new deal. I like how those two guys are, and then you have Jaquaski Tart, who's also in there, and then a couple undrafted rookies, or one undrafted rookie that will probably make the team too. So Yeah, the back end of the defense is constantly evolving, but I do like Reed and Ward as your 1-2 back there.
And it has to be one of John Lynch's favorite parts because he was talking about it so much today.
As a former safety.
And in that cornerback position, too, I don't know if we really touched on that all that much during morning availability, but there's that spot that's opposite what we expect to be Rashard Robinson's, what he expects to be his position. And you have guys like Keith Reese or Dante Johnson, and even maybe an Akella Witherspoon, you know, kind of throwing into the mix, I think, third round pick. Yeah. How do you guys anticipate that matchup shaking out, just because of where some of the weaknesses were with its defensive backfield last year?
Cam, you said way more of the offensive stuff than I did, so I'll defer to your scouting eye.
Well, but you don't need to say. Here's the thing, and I'm not going to talk about Keith Reeser or Akella Witherspoon or Dante Johnson. I think this is one of the positions where the 49ers, if they're still low on talent in the league compared to other teams, once those cuts are made at the end of exhibition season, well, the Niners are going to be up there in the waiver claim. Yep. And if I'm them, I'm going after anybody that's better than anybody on the roster, even if there's some fringe guys that are younger where you're not sure about that probably you want to give some time to. Well, forget it. You need to get some upgrading going now. And if you can get a top quality player to make your team better right now, then do it. And cornerback could be one of those spots. If they're unsure between 3 or 4 guys who could be that cornerback on the other side of Robert, well, that means nobody's won the job. And so I think that's where, and there's going to be other positions where the Niners might find, so to speak, on the waiver wire.
Shanahan said as much today, right? That's going to be part of their thing. He's going to be counting on John Lynch to be active, to be watching that. And even if it's somebody who had a better past 5 days of practice than somebody had right here, they're going to be open to upgrading. Shanahan said something interesting. Lots of coaches say it, but he said, you know, the sign that they make it as a franchise is when they cut guys who should be playing in the NFL. Mm-hmm. They're not that level yet.
Well, Balky kind of said the same thing over years when he would load up on tight ends and then trade away a lot of, like, he traded away the wrong one to Washington a couple years ago and Derek Carrier rather than trade, anyhow. Enough about it.
You could have cut a few more.
Right, yeah.
Wrapping this part up really quick before we get to some of your questions, reminder, if you have a question you want us to answer, a few more minutes, hashtag BA Sports Insiders on Twitter, comment below and scribble live. I really liked what Kyle Shanahan said about, you know, as you said, don't put stock in the preseason. There's very little you can actually take away until these guys are at game speed, but to figure out which guys are going to be able to play at that game speed. If a guy hits somebody in camp, that's going to happen again. If you're able to do that once, you're able to do it again. With running backs, I mean, that's the position group that's so, you know, it's so bloated right now with 7 of them, and whether, you know, Carlos Hyde is going to be that feature back, which they've struggled to make him that the last few years, or kind of have that committee by design, which was so successful in Atlanta. I really thought it was interesting. So, you know, you can't tell in practice when they're doing that until they are going for the yards after contact, until they're actually breaking those tackles. How does that work, Dan, into this group of, you know, you have 7 here. You know, Carlos Hyde, you know, Kyle Juszczyk going to be in there, and then, you know, as you mentioned, there's some, you know, intriguing stuff with rookies like Joe Williams. Right? And Joe Williams, who at Utah caught some passes. Mm-hmm. You know, he showed he can catch the ball out of the backfield. You know, he didn't just say, like, speed, it's can these guys handle the pressure? Mm-hmm. And we laugh and think, oh, second preseason game, how much pressure? But for those guys who are trying to make the roster, trying to win a job, guys whose careers are at stake, there is pressure in those games. And you can see why some guys might freeze up or not play as well as they do in practice when nobody's watching. I think Joe Williams is really a guy to watch. Shanahan showed with Atlanta that he will incorporate more than one back, and I think it worked really, really well last year, Super Bowl included until the very end, the way they spread the ball around. I think the Niners, you know, Kaepernick at times would lock on his favorite receiver. He'd lock on that hot hand for a while, and there's no element of surprise at all. The roster now, with this deep list of guys to choose from, they might open things up and have a multiple running back attack. You know,
the 49ers over the past decade have become known in the preseason for producing the NFL rushing champion. And it's usually the guy that's the last string guy on that may not make it. So I would look for Matt Breida, Capri Bibbs to probably duke it out to see who's going to get the most carries in the preseason. Because I think Joe Williams is on the team, obviously. You know, Hyde's going to be on the team and probably just get spot duty in the exhibition season just to get warmed up. And Tim Hightower is kind of the proven vet that's around.
And Juice, factoring him in.
Yeah, you got the nickname now. You can call it use check.
Yeah,
the juice.
Following along.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all those guys could do it. But think about this. Go back two preseasons ago when Jared Hayne was part of that backfield, right? And then he used that preseason to secure a job that soon enough proved to be not for him in the NFL. But that was also because he fumbled on the punt returns too. But like I said, that came in the regular season when everything picks up.
All right, a couple questions coming in right now. What position represents the biggest upgrade from last season to this year?
If I recall right, Lynch was really big on the defensive line.
Yeah.
You know, they really upgraded the defensive line.
Have they not upgraded it every single year, though? I mean, that's how they spent their first pick.
No, because they ignored the pass rush situation the last couple of years, which was a big downfall. You know, once Alden Smith left, they didn't have anybody to step in as a pass rusher, and they brought in Elvis Dumerville. You have, obviously, you have Buckner, Armstead, and Thomas, now your top picks. And then they brought in Earl Mitchell to help solidify the interior, along with Thomas when he gets in there too. So I would agree that the defensive line is probably the most upgraded position. But I mean, you look around, you can make an argument for every position probably on the team because everything was so bad and deteriorated last season.
Quarterback?
Yeah, check back next year.
We actually do have a question about Brian Hoyer. How is he doing? And I think that honestly means on the field, not necessarily the other stuff. You know, does he have that winning mindset? This comes from Andres Hernandez. Do you think he does? I mean, it's been 9 seasons, so he's obviously been through this.
Mindset.
What Staley said about Hoyer?
About Hoyer's winning mindset. He's a super competitive guy.
Oh yeah, likes to win everything. But
aren't all NFL quarterbacks?
I would cross that off my. That's in your notebook. I didn't make that down. You know, they say that about all guys. But I think Hoyer. You know, the question is, how's he looking? We can't tell either, right? The coaches say we need to see the pads on these guys. I haven't seen him throw a pass.
I'll say one thing. So, maybe a few months ago, I wrote a story saying, I don't know how Hoyer is on the deep ball because we haven't seen him connect on long passes. I'm not saying he can't throw it. I'm just saying in the media availability we had not seen him connect on a deep pass. And sure enough, that next day at practice, they ran a go route for Marquise Goodwin, about a 60-yard throw into the wind, and it hit Goodwin basically in stride. And at least one member of the offensive huddle turned and said, "Hey, Cam, that was for you." So that's actually a good thing, not in that they ripped me, but that they're defending their quarterback. So he already won over the offensive teammates. But again, I want to see him hit more of those guys to make sure that, this is a quarterback that, because Matt Ryan was great at hitting the deep ball last year, and that opened everything up on that offense.
How does that backup quarterback situation, before we go, we need to touch on that with Matt Barkley, and then you bring in C.J. Beathard, who's their 4th-round pick. Beathard, who's their 4th-round pick, and then Nick Mullins from Southern Miss, who undrafted rookie free agents. So there's 4 right now. Obviously, it seems like they'll probably get down to 3. For the backup job, I mean, could you see Beathard potentially making a play?
I kind of like Matt Barkley. I think he's got some upside. You probably saw him watching
many
the Bears.
years.
Yeah, what did you think?
I mean, I think that was not exactly their, that was kind of the decline years for the Chicago Bears. So I don't think you can take much away from that.
He showed flashes at times of being a pretty good quarterback. So
I think Matt wants to be great, and I think that's a good thing to have, that he wants to be a really good quarterback still. And obviously he's very familiar with Hoyer because they played together last year in Chicago. So he's got that going for him. So it's going to be a great quarterback room. And the Niners they have no need to pressure Beathard into a number 2 role. And the second he got drafted, Lynch and Shanahan came out in the draft day press conference saying, look, he's our number 3. He's a developmental quarterback.
But they were pumped about him. They were.
This is the quarterback they liked because one trait that they saw in C.J. Beathard was he's willing to stick in the pocket and just be ready to take a lick, but he's got to get his pass on. And they love that about him. And I like that they explain that well rather than just say, he's a lot of upside and potential. There's that trait that won them over. And that's a trait that you need to have in today's NFL with so many good pass rushers, and the offensive lines have been declining so much in the NFL. And the Niners' offensive line's getting better, I would say. But at the same time, I think the only way Beathard can unseat Matt Barkley at the number 2 spot is if Barkley falters really badly and just looks terrible. And but at the same time, I would expect all 3 to be on the roster.
Okay. All right, summer's over. Training camp starting tomorrow, Friday, 10 a.m. here in Santa Clara. Be sure to give Cam a follow on Twitter, Dan as well. They will keep you updated on all the happenings here at 49ers Training Camp. If you have further questions, be sure to use those using the hashtag BA Sports Insiders on Twitter, and we will get to them throughout the next few days, and we'll see you back here next week at training camp. For Dan Brown and Cam Inman, I'm Courtney Cronin. Thanks for watching.